And now the second in a three-part series on covert action with John Stockwell and Louis Wolf.
John, there has been over the last few years also a small handful of journalists who have been sort of CIA watchdogs, most prominent of which has been Louis Wolf. We have an interview with him. Maybe you can, to introduce this interview, tell us a little bit about Louis Wolf and his journalistic publications. Who is Louis and what has he been doing over the years, and why is the government so outraged by him?
Well, his background is it's thoroughly legitimate, standard, if you will, journalism. He was assigned for a couple of years in Manchester, writing for a couple of prominent news organizations.
Manchester, England?
Yes, Manchester, England. And eventually made his way through London back to the United States, where he gravitated to scrutiny of the CIA and the intelligence community, watching the revelations of the Church Committee, information that he had come across in his research, some of which he had published as part of news stories previously, other parts of which he was not permitted to publish by the nature of the press establishment. And so he put together with Bill Schaap and Ellen Ray the Covert Action Information Bulletin, whose function was to focus on the intelligence organizations of the United States and discuss and expose in a perfectly legitimate way the covert action activities of the CIA principally, as well as the other intelligence organizations. I believe they formed that in about 1976 and have been in Washington since, publishing stories of true stories. Their quality, their standards of journalism are exceedingly high. That bulletin is distributed in the State Department, and it's sold out the first morning that it's put on the stands in the State Department newsstands. They also publish in that bulletin the names of CIA agents and where they are now, as they're assigned and reassigned about the world. I believe that in very recent months they have ceased the policy of publishing names because the controversy is so hot, and they would just as soon. And also, it's never been their intention to break the law. They've made that clear from the outset. Bill Schaap is the brother. He is a highly competent attorney and is the brother of a top sportscaster in New York City. He is a very articulate man himself and has testified to the Senate many times against the names of Agents Bill, for example, and defending what he and Lou Wolf are doing. And after his testimony, many times senators have come up and shaken his hand and said, I disagree with you, but you certainly make your case for the legitimacy of what you're doing very well.
Let's take a look at some of the things which Louis Wolf had to say, and we'll let you comment ever so often on this, okay?
What, in the years that you've been publishing it, do you think are some of your most significant revelations? Are there some stories that even shocked you?
Well, I think one of the big stories that we were able to document in some detail was the whole scope of CIA activities, similar to what the CIA did in Chile, and which was documented by the Senate Select Committee, was the whole covert action program in Jamaica in between 1976 and 1980. And we did a great deal of research into that, and we discovered in many ways a very similar program, almost a classic model that was followed along the lines of what they did in Chile, including three major categories: military, paramilitary activity, the use of propaganda in the media, and the third one, which was economic warfare, using the multilateral organizations, the International Monetary Fund and others, to withhold loans which had been promised to the Jamaican government. This is one example.
What are a couple more of the details of that? You mentioned those first two examples of actual paramilitary activity the CIA was involved in Jamaica.
There was a fire, for example, that took place in Jamaica of an old people's home. I think 150 old and infirmed women, many of them blind, were living in this home. And as it turned out, the place burned down in the space of about 8 minutes, 7 or 8 minutes. It was discovered that the phone wires had been cut, and that the exits had all been blocked. Even those who could see their way out could not get out. That the means by which the fire was set was the use of a petroleum jelly, which was unavailable in Jamaica. This was one indication, among others, that there was outside help. Why would the CIA, you might ask, why would the CIA want to murder 150 old women? It was because it was an effort, part of a very large-scale effort to discredit the government in Jamaica, which was at the time headed by Michael Manley, the Prime Minister. There were images produced of Michael Manley in the media, in the Daily Gleaner, which was the newspaper which the United States, through the CIA, helped to support. And there is a good deal of evidence of that. There were images of Michael Manley showing a death mask. I mean, it was his face which had been somehow made to look like a death mask, although it was pretending to be a photograph of him. And there were many ways to try and discredit him. This is very, very similar, in fact, to what the CIA did to try and discredit Salvador Allende in Chile. If you remember, Richard Nixon instructed the CIA in a meeting which was in 1970 in the White House, and there was a document in the Senate report which is reprinted, and he said, "Make the economy scream." Those were his words. And that's, of course, what the CIA proceeded to do in Chile, and that's what they also did in Jamaica.
They also furnished a lot of munitions and assistance to the terrorist squads that were going around killing people in the cities and also in the countryside in Jamaica as well.
That's correct.
Well, John, you had a trip down to Jamaica, and you saw a lot of these things about Jamaica with your own eyes, right?
Yes, indeed. A very moving, a very interesting trip to me to see a target country at a time in the height of a CIA operation when I was completely outside. So there's no way that I could see the problem that journalists have always had when the U.S. government was targeting on a country in a situation, trying to destabilize it, overthrow or manipulate the elections or whatever, of trying to figure out what's going on when you don't have access to all of the flow of cables and the discussions in National Security Council meetings and whatnot for the planning. I observed that from published information, the CIA station there was quite large for that size of a country. It was huge, in fact. It was bigger than any station I knew of in Africa, although Jamaica was a fairly small island with 2 million people. That's typical of when the CIA has got a big operation going in a place, they beef up the station and beef up the offices back stateside. The tone and flow of articles in the Gleaner was, of course, as Lou says, definitely a chapter out of Chile or a chapter out of the Angolan operation. Every indication of a massive CIA operation going to destabilize the government, to make the economy scream, and in that case, I would say that probably someone got promoted for that one, probably several people.
Because Manley was run out of office.
Because it worked.
By a legitimate election.
Without a scandal, without an assassination, without the things that have caused the CIA so much grief, Manley, a champion of social democracy, of giving the people a piece of the pie, was thrown out of office, and an arch-capitalist was put in office. And again, there was minimal adverse publicity. Lou Wolf and the others were studying the situation and did publish about what was going on, but it was not published in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and the big television networks didn't do studies on it, primarily because even if the journalists of the big organs knew what was happening and might have wanted to, they really just, because of the secrecy, couldn't get the truth about what the United States was doing. One interesting thing was that the effectiveness of the lies, the liars in our government, you know, the duplicity. When we formed the CIA, we committed our leaders to having two policies, as Lou says, the rhetoric, the public statements, and the truth about what United States policy is. So an interesting measure of presidents is how effectively they lie. Interesting discussions that occur inside the CIA is about lying. Would you lie? You know, you're the DDO and you're going to testify to the Senate, and it's serious discussions. Are you going to lie? Because if you do, it's perjury and there's a chance you could go to jail, and yet, you know, the organization expects you to lie. President Carter was one of the most effective liars I have ever watched on television and through the media. As a poker player, man, I would never go up against that man. He could look at that camera and say things that obviously he knew were completely and totally false. And I would study his expression and I could detect nothing except occasionally a little wisp of a smile that wasn't consistent with what he was saying, like he thought it was funny. But one of his more classic
tick, actually.
Yeah, well, the smile that I was referring to wasn't that. It was just a kind of like he was repressing a grin, like he thought it was funny. How he rationalized these things, I don't know, but one of his most conspicuous lies was when he sat down with Manley just a few weeks before the elections in Washington and told him face to face that the CIA, don't have the CIA doing anything to destabilize you or your government. We have no such program going, when obviously he did. And he pulled it off to the point where even Manley was troubled. Very effective liars.
Another major story that we uncovered was the whole range of CIA media operations throughout the world. We did an analysis of these operations and the use of money, very large-scale money. It's thought between 1/3 and 40% of the CIA's budget. And I should say that that budget figure is the biggest secret that there is in Washington today. At that time, it was estimated that the 1978 budget was in the range of $1.5 billion. A more recent estimate by a military journal, not a liberal journal by any means, estimated that the CIA's budget today is in the range of $10 billion. At any rate, this analysis that we made of the CIA's media operations disclosed, among other things, that they deliver through CIA couriers ready to print or ready to broadcast news, and I put that in inverted commas, which is used by the media. And this is created by the CIA.
How often does the CIA manipulate the media in this way, plant stories, get their views in the media? Is this fairly common as a modus operandi for the CIA?
It goes beyond your, in the course of the past 30 years, it goes beyond your wildest imagination, the extent to which the CIA has gone to manipulate public opinion. If you include the MH Chaos program, which was $1 billion program of setting up proprietary companies, setting up student organizations so they could draw radical students in and do every kind of duplicitous manipulation of national student movements, press, propaganda, labor, extensive formation of labor unions, funding of major labor unions, with the objective essentially of manipulating the mind and attitudes of workers throughout the nation and the world. This was the essential tool that they used to destabilize Chile and overthrow Allende. Was, of course, making the economy scream, getting to the military officers, but it was essentially the truckers' union that finally brought the country down and justified, quote, justified Pinochet's takeover of power. 5,000 university professors they've co-opted. This is Church Committee revelations. I'm not making this up. It's in print. Church Committee's revelations. 5,000 university professors co-opted to help the CIA manipulate people's minds. 400 journalists in the U.S., including big-name journalists. Now, that's a big chunk of the prominent journalists co-opted to function routinely to help the CIA put out its stories and biases to the world.
There are a whole range of areas wherein the CIA provides briefings to selected journalists, and there are numerous cases where the CIA has, for example, published books, and several thousand books were published in English by the CIA, and this is documented in the Church Committee report. They set up 250 news services and wire services, some of which, not all, but some of which are still in the pocket of the CIA. And I think it's only fair to say that even some journalists who don't realize, there are some who are witting, but there are also some who do not realize that they're being targeted by the CIA when they come home from a trip overseas. They might talk to somebody and they don't realize, at least right away, who they're talking to, and then it turns out that they've been the source of information which was used by the CIA.
And then specific operations around the world from corner to corner to discredit this individual, create an impression about that situation, such as El Salvador, the famous white papers in the Angolan operation, which I note were, you know, back in the good old days, we did a better job. Our white papers in the Angolan operation were based on very specific photographs and hard information of Soviet ships putting into Porto Ambuim in Angola. The white paper that the CIA produced for Alexander Haig to justify the intervention in El Salvador was a piece of trash. It was discredited by the right and the left and the center. It didn't hold together.
I should point, for example, to the stories that came out during the Angola operation, where it was discovered that the CIA was involved in a massive covert operation, which the Congress cut off when they learned about it. There were certainly a small handful, really a tiny handful, you could count them on the fingers of one hand, of the members of Congress who knew about that operation and the scale of it beforehand, and then they cut it off. Well, one of the revelations at the time that came out was that the CIA had created a story that was planted in the media that the Cubans who were in Angola at the time were raping Angolan women, and that they were really doing very, very gross things to these women and killing them. Well, it was disclosed, in fact, by John Stockwell, among other people, who was the former CIA station chief, or in charge of the CIA's task force in Angola, that that whole story was created by the CIA station in Zambia and in Zaire, where they sat around a table and wrote this story, and then it was fed to a stringer, who then fed it to a news service, who then got it to the AP, Associated Press, who then picked it up and was sent around the world, and it was printed in hundreds of newspapers as fact.
But you can rest assured that it is at least very difficult for the American people, including us, to know what is true about the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, for example, or about El Salvador, or about Argentina and the Falklands right now. Our former ally of a month ago is now our enemy in this confrontation. In Jamaica, for example, and then this very specific, the Libyan hit squad, the mythical Libyan hit squad. We had a situation where President Reagan and President Gaddafi were confronting each other internationally. Reagan ordered our ship into what Libya claims is its waters, with the specific intention of either standing Gaddafi down or provoking an incident. And it worked. He shot down 2 Libyan jet fighter planes. And then Gaddafi was incensed, and there was a credibility problem. There was the president of the giant United States confronting this relatively small Arab country.
I guess this leads us to your Covert Action Information Bulletin, because there's a story in here about the hit squads, and it actually originated apparently with the Israeli secret police, the Mossad.
It's a very interesting case study of how these propaganda operations can come about. Apparently, since the Israelis, working as they have for many years very closely, the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, or Mossad, has worked very, very closely with the CIA, and in fact the CIA helped to set it up back in the mid-50s. Originally, part of the story came from Mossad, that there were 2 people who apparently were either employed or were agents, contract agents for Mossad, who fed some of this information to the U.S. government.
I see.
And the U.S. government was fully prepared to believe it. They said that one of their witnesses, or one of their sources, had been polygraphed and had checked out, his information had checked out. There was a story suggesting that it was reported by one of the networks that somebody had been offered $250,000 for his information, to the effect that there were hit squads. And some of it originated, as I said, from Mossad, and some of it originated from CIA fabrications. Jack Anderson, for example, reported that some of the information that he had been given and reported in his column had turned out to have been CIA fabrications. It's important to remember that the Israelis, as much, I guess, as the U.S., considers it a priority to discredit and to possibly destabilize or overthrow the Libyan government. And one method that they thought of, I guess, was to create a story that said that Libya had sent death squads to assassinate President Reagan and other high officials. Only recently,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, only recently, some of the same high officials who before were saying that that they had evidence that some of these hit squads had entered the country through Canada, are now on record and quoted in Newsweek and in other media saying that they never located a single person and a single evidence that there was a hit squad, and yet they say there is still a threat. Well, I think it's fair to assume, though there is not enough information yet to say, but it's fair to assume that the CIA was hoping through this to create a justification for further intervention in Libya, possible military activity or economic boycott or blockade, as they've now proposed, as has been proposed by the White House.
Well, let's take a look at some of the articles in the latest issue of the Covert Action Information Bulletin. Not only will it give you an idea of what the magazine is about, it's, oh my goodness, over 50 pages, but also it gives, just this one issue, gives a good example of the widespread operations not only of the CIA, it's not just restricted to the CIA, but mercenary activities around the world as well. We have been following the Seychelles Island attempted coup ever since it started, and we did a program with John Stockwell just recently where we mentioned that. I noticed on page 4 you have an article that says Seychelles beat back the mercenaries. This is quite a complex operation which involves South Africa and mercenaries and the French. Was the CIA involved in that?
There's still a lot of information that will come out, but it is known that some of the activity, I should say primarily the main source of the coup or attempted coup was South Africa. That South African intelligence, including one admitted so-called former member of the South African Intelligence Corps, who says that he quote-unquote retired in order to go for a visit to the Seychelles for his vacation. And largely the program was initiated by the South Africans. It does appear, however, that the United States, which has had an ongoing interest in creating a base of operations in the Indian Ocean, and the Seychelles is a very strategic area, not just because of its, it has no large natural resources as such, but that it is a critical importance to the U.S. as a jumping point in the Indian Ocean.
But it looks like there are other aspects too, that they're also trying to keep the government of Mauritius from becoming a more progressive government. There were some significant elections coming up. Plus there was something I didn't know at all, and that was the fact that there is an island chain, Comoros, which actually were taken over in a coup which was carried out by mercenaries.
Yes, in that case it was largely French intelligence which was the source of that one. There is some indication that the CIA was involved, though somewhat peripherally, in that one.
So I can see where that could stimulate people like in the group down in New Orleans of missionaries. Boy, they are, in a way, aren't they? of mercenaries that were going to take over Dominica.
Yes.
Since the apparently the plot fell through for Grenada. And they've seen that it can happen in Comoros, that they actually can take over an island government and run it.
The case of the attempted coup in Dominica is a very interesting one, and here the U.S. Involvement is rather strong. There